Well, cool. Well, awesome to have you here, Christie. You're with Real Estate Rockstars, correct?
I am. Next Home.
Real Estate Rockstars. That's right. Next Home. And you've been doing it since 2016 out of Santa Clarita, but you're a lot of different areas in Southern California, correct? What areas are your primary areas where you do real estate?
I would say primary areas are Santa Clarita Valley, San Fernando Valley, Antelope Valley, Ventura County. So Ventura, Oxnard, Simi Valley, all that good stuff, Thousand Oaks. And then, but I do go kind of far out there. I've done Orange County all the way through to San Diego. I've done Big Bear. I've done Tehachapi. So I'm kind of all over, but I would say those are my main areas is Ventura County, Santa Clarita, San Fernando Valley, and Antelope Valley.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, the reason why I wanted to have you here is because there's been big changes this week, like probably the biggest changes, at least in the last 20 years that I've been doing business. So I wanted to talk to you about it. I want to get educated. I want to know you as a realtor, what your thoughts are behind it. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What are the changes that we need to know about? And I've done some research on my end as the lender and how that's going to affect the loans.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that too. But so NAR changed some laws.
They sure did. It feels like it's been a long time coming, honestly, but the changes just went into effect from the settlement, from the lawsuit that was going on with the National Association of Realtors, officially went into effect on August 17th. So a few days ago, almost 1 week ago.
Who sued the National Association of Realtors?
From my understanding, every seller participated in a class action lawsuit, and that's kind of how it got started.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the changes that is happening is before you would be, say, a listing agent, and you would basically go to your seller and say, we're going to charge 5% commission, and then you're going to split that with the buy side agent.
Right.
Correct? That's the way it was, which has always been negotiable. Some people charge 6%, some people charge 5%. Some I've seen others, like depending on if you get both sides, you'll maybe discount it at 4%.
Right.
So with the changes now, what's taking place? Like, what are the differences?
Yeah. So I think you kind of touched on it already. So traditionally, the idea would be that the sellers negotiate their commission, since commission has always been negotiable. They negotiate their commission directly with their seller's agent, who's going to be listing their property. And then traditionally that listing agent splits or divides in some way that's generally 50-50-ish with the buyer's agent to compensate them for their efforts for bringing in the buyer and bringing that buyer through escrow. So it's essentially always been a marketing cost, a marketing expense that's rolled into the seller expectation of paying the buyer's agent as a marketing expense to sell their home. And so the seller's agent would traditionally split that in half just for purposes of an example. Let's say that the listing agent signed an agreement with their seller for 6%. The idea would be to then offer within the MLS 3%. So they keep 3% for themselves, and then they pay the buyer's agent at the close of escrow 3% out of that 6%.
So the way it was, if you were a buyer's agent, you go onto the MLS and you know exactly what you're getting paid.
Correct. Yeah.
The MLS.
Right. So you would log onto the MLS, you would see what your clients want to see, and then it would display within the MLS what you would be making on the commission for that home. Okay. Now how it's changed is we are no longer allowed to use the word commission. So it is a bad word. Don't ever say commission again. It is now compensation or concessions is what we are allowed to say. And that is how it will be recorded in the near future in the MLS as far as concessions. paid through escrow. So now we're not to include the buyer's agent's commission on the MLS. So nowhere can I log in and see what I would be making from representing a buyer in that transaction for that specific home.
Okay.
So now what it requires is essentially more phone conversations. If the agent sees fit to call up the listing agent and say, we're going to go see this home on 123 Main Street. Is your seller willing to consider buyer's agent's concessions? And then the listing agent can then say, submit it with your offer, or submit your request with your offer, or no, they're not, or something of a variation of that response.
Yeah.
So that's what we're having to do now. We basically build it into our buyer's offer.
Okay. So does this seem like a good thing for buyers, for sellers, for real estate? I mean, what are your thoughts? Is this a positive thing or is this not a positive thing?
Well, I think like anything else in the world, it depends on how you look at it, right? For me, I tend to be indifferent about a lot of things in life. So I just, by personality, I couldn't tell you. It's just something that happened. I don't feel anything towards it besides that this is the way that it is now, and we're going to roll with the punches, and the sky is not falling, and we're going to be okay, right? So similar to for those that were in the business in the COVID days in 2020 and those few years, right? They had implemented this form that we could not show properties without it being signed. So it's similar to the COVID days in that we have to have a buyer broker agreement signed with our buyers as a buyer agent prior to showing any property. So I cannot, even if they're my own client, we've been working together forever, I can no longer show you a property without first discussing with my buyer what I'm going to be getting paid on the transaction, what my fee is for my services. And if the seller does not agree to help with those concessions, then the buyer is responsible for paying me for my services at the close of escrow. So I have to get that buyer broker agreement signed prior to opening the door and showing any kind of property. So it's similar to the pandemic days in that we do have to have a signed form prior to going to show properties.
Okay. So in the pandemic, from what I understood, I don't do real estate, but it sounded to me like it was kind of a pain in the butt to show properties. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. No, you're not wrong at all. Everyone that's in the industry kind of rolls their eyes when we bring up PEADS, is what they were called, PEADS. And PEADS were required during the pandemic to show any property. So now we kind of all, oh my God, PEADS. Remember those days, And it was an annoying extra step, but it was something, again, that was just required. So this buyer broker agreement does have more weight, in my opinion, to the importance of having that signed, because we want to be transparent with what we are making from the sale of that home. And we want to be sure that the buyer has the money to cover your services for your representation should they fall in love with the home. And unfortunately, that seller is not willing to compensate the buyer's agent any kind of amount. So it does have more weight to this buyer broker agreement prior to showing houses to make sure that that's signed, and that will be policed as far as I hear from the powers that be.
So let me ask you a question. So if, let's say you guys sign the agreement, your buyer and you agree on whatever, 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is.
Right.
The seller is not willing to budge. Seller's like, nope, I'm not paying anything towards that. That's on you guys. Is that going to does that become renegotiable? Like if you go back to the buyer and said, well, you want this property, I'll just discount to 2% versus 3%. So it's more affordable. It's not going to cost you as much. Are things like that going to happen? Or is that contract set in stone? You can't change it. Like what's going to happen?
It's negotiable through a modification of terms. However, you cannot go up. You can only go down. So if I tell my client that my service fee is 2.5%, two things. If the seller was willing to pay 3%, it doesn't matter. I don't get 3%.
So
even if
all
the
the
seller
buyers
was willing to.
all the buyers out there, you are worth 6% now, and you can come.
Yeah, exactly. So even if the seller was willing to pay that, I do not get that 3% because I had signed a buyer broker agreement with my buyer at 2.5%. So that can happen. And then I can also, I can't go up, but if my fee is 2.5%, and they really love this home, and I decide for my specific clients, understanding the work that I've put in, understanding the services I've provided, understanding who these clients are and where their numbers are at with their lender, which is just another thing that we have to discuss with our lenders and what makes lenders so important. But we're going to have to revise those numbers to a reasonable fee that works for everybody, so that, I mean, I would personally do that on a case-by-case basis, but I can't speak for every, realtor that whether they would go down or not, or renegotiate with their clients.
Okay.
I would.
In the case, so as of before this week, a lot of times when you would buy a house, you would negotiate with the seller, what's called seller concessions.
Right.
So, and those seller concessions will help cover closing costs for the buyers. So that's very beneficial for somebody that is maybe doing a 5% down, these lower end down payments, and they don't have a ton of money. So that was super helpful. So I know there's been a lot of talks in the past, like, how is this going to affect that? Because if you put less than 10% down, you can only get 3% seller concession. So then what people were worried about is like, well, if I can only get 3% seller concession and I need that for my closing cost, how am I going to get the rest for the to pay, from this to pay the buyer's agent too? So here's the good news: is it's not actually affecting it. So I'm sure you're aware of that, which is cool. So I just actually found that out yesterday.
Right.
Was trying to look in like, hey, okay, how's this going to affect everything? So it's basically irrelevant. So we still are capped out at 3% with 10% or less down. I should say less than 10% down. And then if you're putting more than 10% down, 6%, and then 75% or less, you're at 9%. So you still have the same ability for that. So
right. I know that was a great concern for a while on how it was going to work on the financing side and what limits we were going to hit. So I think that's a relief to know that there are ways around it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I mean, what are your thoughts, Chris, as an attorney, man? Like, have you kind of been following any of this? I
followed some of it, and at the end of the day, I don't know that it changes a whole lot. I mean, there's some hoops that the buyer agents are going to have to jump through, but as far as the home buying experience goes, so I'm going to basically sign a contract with my buyer's agent, agree to pay them their 2%, 2.5%, whatever it's going to be, and then we're going to make an offer, and that's where you're going to negotiate, which is always the case.
Yeah, I guess it's more transparent in a sense, maybe a little bit more paperwork and a little harder to show homes, but it could be a benefit to the buyers because now there's that negotiation is more in their awareness, I guess, right?
Yeah, I don't even know that it is. I mean, we're still talking the same, like 5 to 6%. Right? That hasn't changed.
So
the only thing that changed is paperwork.
I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I mean, what if they start saying, no, I'm not going to pay it? Are you going to see a lot of sellers that refuse?
Right.
But if they're refusing,
then they're probably going to end up keeping their house. Right? They're not going to be able to sell the house.
Yeah, and that's what I was, to go back to your question on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, right? I think there's silver linings to everything, but it is, and it's always been built into the value of the home. So for example, if the seller's home has traditionally in recent comps shown that it's worth and appraised for $900,000, that's already calculating the buyer's agent's concessions into it traditionally, right? And so now if they're not going to be paying that, then perhaps the value of their home changes slightly to, because we were essentially overcompensating to build in that concession into that sales price. So, but sellers really want to look at it as a marketing expense. No realtor is going to work for free, right? We all have bills to pay. We all got to eat. So this is our work and it's our profession. So sellers need to realize that to sell their home, part of that is going to include somewhat of a marketing expense, right? So they'll just want to hire an agent who'll carefully review their offers with them and look at all of their options. Similarly, with buyers, yes, I work with a lot of first-time home buyers who often, a lot of times, are scraping every dollar they have, especially in California with the way that cost of living is. They're scraping every dollar they have just to make that offer on that house. And so, yes, it's unfortunate if they fall in love with a home where the seller is not willing to pay $1 towards the buyer's agent's concessions and they're tapped out financially. Well, then that's when we have to go back to the lender and take another look at their numbers. And maybe we need to adjust our max purchase price a little bit because that's going to be somewhat included as a closing cost. You want to make sure that your agent's getting paid as a closing cost.
Yeah. And also maybe adjust the rate to get more lender credits or something like that. So you
got to get creative, right? You got to work as a team. That's why it's so important to have the team behind you.
Here's my concern. I'll tell you why it concerns me.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that more buyers are going to go straight to the selling agent and circumvent buying agents. And the reason why that concerns me is because, I just closed a deal like last month where luckily he had a buyer's agent, but somehow he connected with the seller and the seller's agent, and he was in talks with them, and they were flippers, smooth guys. This was out of California, but they kind of told him some information that I didn't feel served his best interest. And he was kind of believing him. And so like him and I, we had to have some heart to hearts and say, hey, listen, quit talking with them. There was some permits that weren't permitted in the state that this was in. It was very important to have these permits because of weather and stuff. So, and they were trying to talk him into just closing the way it was. And I was like, I don't think that's safe. You should make sure these are done right. And because it is very important with tornadoes and hurricanes and stuff like that in that state. So I just that's what concerns me is more and more of that kind of stuff's going to happen where the sellers are not going to be, and the seller's agent are not going to be working for the best interest of the buyer.
Correct. And so that's actually where the buyer broker agreement really has the most play and the most protection. And so 3 things on that. So some agents, it's important to keep in mind, and more agents are starting to do that with these changes, is that they will not participate in dual representation. So as a brokerage, they will not represent both the seller and the buyer. For that specific reason, right? Of having your fiduciary duty to one party. A lot of agents are now saying, absolutely not. I will not do a dual representation. Okay.
Really? Okay.
I refer you to another agent or a colleague of mine or someone that I feel will get the deal done, but I will not represent both the buyer and the seller. So more and more agents are doing that. And then secondarily, no one's going to work for free. When you do dual representation, you're doing double the work, and it's almost
that's true.
It's hard to navigate when you're dealing with your fiduciary duty to the seller and to the buyer, because it's communicating with both of them, and you never want to have your client feel like you have one person's back over the other, or they're greater interest in mine than the other. So you are still going to be getting compensated. So the seller or the buyer is still going to be paying you that fee. That percentage. So even if it's at a discounted rate from what you would pay traditionally, your 5 or 6% to your seller's agents, you're still going to be paying that fee for the buyer's agent side, because no one works for free, right? So someone's paying it. And so you're kind of back to square one. And then thirdly, the buyer broker agreement, having that signed, it disables my client from circumventing and going to the seller's agent or going to any other agent because they have a contract with me. And this is maybe where Chris can kind of speak to it as well, because that is a contractual legal document when you sign that buyer broker agreement, and the buyer is committing to paying that percentage to their buyer's agent. So what you don't want to do as a buyer, very important, is go into open houses or go interview multiple buyer's agents, which you should do, but you should not sign multiple buyer broker agreements, because when you do that, you're now committing to me 2.5%, to this agent 2.5%, and this agent 2.5%. So if we show you the same property, all three agents theoretically could come after you for that 2.5%. Now you're not stuck paying 2.5%. You're stuck paying 7% or whatever it may be. So you always want to make sure you know what you're signing.
Yeah. So don't sign anything from any agents unless you know 100% you are working with this agent and nobody else.
Right. Unless it's a non-exclusive. So there's so many nuances to contracts, which is why it's really just so important to interview your buyer's agent and your seller's agent and make sure that they know what they're talking about with these changes. But unless it's a non-exclusive where it's a little box that's checked on the same form that says it's not exclusive, then you are able to sign multiple things. And there is a different form outside of the buyer broker agreement called the property viewing form, which I just signed with someone that I'm meeting today because we do not have an established relationship with each other, but they want to see my listing. And I said, guys, I'm so sorry. I know you don't know me. It's weird to sign this without having met me in person, but I cannot show you this property unless I tell you what my service fee is and unless I get this property viewing form signed. So they went ahead and we had a conversation and they signed it so that I can show them this property tonight.
So that is one of your listings that the buyer came directly to you. Is that correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then what happens if they want the property? Are they going to talk to you? Or are they going to get an agent involved? Like, how's that? What do you foresee that could happen with that? Because are you not going to represent both of them? Or if they do want to go through you, you would negotiate your buyer side fee with them? Or how would that work?
Kind of all of the above. So really it's the seller's decision, right? Okay. So in this particular situation, and it is for me going to be on a case-by-case basis. My brokerage does not, they do allow us to do a representation if we wanted to do dual representation. So I'm going to continue to do that on a case-by-case basis if I feel like it is in the best interest of the seller. This particular seller, she hasn't lived in the home. She's not emotionally tied to it. And so her and I already had that conversation where it is possible that I might be also representing the buyer. She was totally fine with that. So if the buyer loves this home, I've only signed an agreement with them to show them this one property. If I want to go show them and build a client relationship with them where I'm showing them multiple properties, I'm going to get that buyer broker agreement signed. This is just the property viewing form for this specific property. But because I've had the necessary conversations with my seller to do that, then I would, in this case, represent the buyer as well. I would present the offer to my seller at a rate that I charge for dual representation. And then she would agree or not agree to it, but it is still open for other buyers and their buyers' agents to submit an offer. So she'll have all the offers in front of her, and then we'll go ahead and discuss what's going to be best for her bottom line.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's really case by case now.
Have you heard of any sellers? I mean, this is so brand new, so I don't know how many people have actually gone on listing or anything, as of today. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but are you seeing any pushback yet from sellers saying, well, I don't want to pay, for anything extra. I'm just going to pay you and that's it.
Yes, we are running into sellers that are, most of the time it's just misinformation, they're just misinformed. And so again, really important that you interview multiple listing agents and they explain to you what it is that marketing expense is going to go towards, right? And so if you then see the value in it, most sellers, by the time that we educate them on why the lawsuit, where it is now, and what we're seeing, where over 99% of homes in the last 6 months have paid a buyer's agent concession of 2.5% or more, they begin to see the value. And when you break down the numbers of the comparable properties in their neighborhood selling for X amount and paying X amount to the buyer's agent, they start to see that, okay, if I want my home sold in a certain amount of days, I don't want to be, like Chris had mentioned, sitting on the market, twiddling my thumbs. It's probably in my best interest as a seller to consider paying a buyer's agent concession. So I think with a lot of education and examples, that they come to see the importance of it. And so it's,
one of the things I imagine will happen is, people talk in the industry, and if there's a seller who's just stubborn and says, I'm not paying any buyer's commissions, that's going to be out there, and nobody's going to be bringing their clients to see that house. I wouldn't.
And that's kind of what the general, consensus is. But there are going to be those sellers that simply say absolutely not. And again, commissions have always been negotiable. So fine, but then it's going to be up to the buyer's agent to then discuss that with their buyer and say, hey, like, you love this house. I get it, right? They're not paying a single dime. So let's talk about that fee that you committed to. Can we make that work with your numbers? Otherwise, we might have to take our broken hearts and try again to go see a house that's more affordable to you, or another home where the seller is offering some sort of concession to your agent, making it more affordable for you in the long run as a buyer.
If the seller is willing to offer that, can you put that on your marketing material so every agent that wants to see the property doesn't have to call you and bother you and ask you? Is there any way that people can know in advance?
Great question. The simple answer is that you cannot post it anywhere on the MLS or any Zillow or any real estate services online. But what you can do, and what you are able to do, is within the home itself, you can put, thank you buyer brokers for showing the property. The seller is willing to consider paying a concession. But that requires a little checkbox on the listing agreement that you have signed with your seller that says, yes, I'm willing to consider a buyer's agent concession with the offer. So there's a section on the contract itself that then permits you to put that posted in the property itself.
So the only way they're gonna know if the seller is willing to pay is if they actually see the property.
So that's the way to post it, to your question. The second way is picking up the phone, old school style, and asking the agent what's going on. But third is also in the MLS. If you look very closely, you'll see that there's a little toggle, and it says seller is willing to consider concessions. So there's a little toggle on the MLS that will show it. It will not show the amount at all.
So you still do the open houses just for the agents, like when a property's first coming out on the market?
Yeah.
And can you tell them all?
You can.
You have all the agents.
Yeah. So like, for example, in my listings, I go ahead and I post welcome buyer brokers, seller is willing, we've decoupled the concession structure. Seller is willing to consider a concession. I will not put amount. I basically will tell every agent that comes through the open house that this seller, in particular, case by case basis, is willing to offer a concession with your offer submission. So but if you're hosting an open house, it's extremely important that we as listing agents let the buyer's agents and the buyers know that come in without their agent, I am here on behalf of my seller. I'm here to sell this home. You have to sign in now. It's required that you sign in at your open house that you're going through. And I cannot give you one drop of information that has to do with an offer. So if you start talking to me as a buyer, you walk into my open house and you're a buyer and you're just looky-looing and you say, where our offer's at, or I'm thinking about submitting an offer at X amount. Can I get the buyer's agent paid? Anything of that conversation, I will not be able to give you information because I do not represent you. And so I'm going to tell you, hey, do you have a buyer broker agreement signed with your agent? And they say no. Perfect. After my open house, I'm going to call you and I'm going to explain what a buyer broker agreement is. And then I'm going to be free once you sign that to give you more information on the property. But it's important to remember that negotiations begin in the first conversation about that house. So I have to be extremely transparent that I'm there on the behalf of the seller to sell the house. If you want to come to me to write an offer, or if you want to discuss things further, I'm going to need that buyer broker agreement signed, and then we can talk freely.
So what happens if I'm a buyer and I just want to represent myself? I don't want to hire a buyer's broker.
Yeah, great question. If you want to represent yourself, I would say go ahead and submit your offer.
Good luck getting the contract.
I'm a professional realtor. I strongly advise you against it simply because I don't think that your offer is going to be strongly considered amongst others that may have representation. But I would say absolutely submit your highest and best. But I would also advise you to seek counsel from a real estate attorney. And so maybe I can have them call you, Chris. And you can do the contracts, because these are legal documents. There's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars at play and at risk here. And if you don't know what you're doing and you don't do this every day, you could really shoot yourself in the foot. So if you want to represent yourself, by all means do so. I would strongly recommend you consult an attorney. But out of that, it's out of my hands. I can't advise you otherwise.
Definitely in real estate, people are very sue happy. So if you're not making the right disclosures and everything, you could just be setting yourself up for failure. So. Exactly.
I mean, realtors are not door openers. I know sometimes, people are like, I'm not paying anyone. I can do this myself. There's really so much that goes on behind the scenes, and contractually you can get really in over your head really quickly. And something that's such an asset, you should probably make sure that you're crossing all your T's and dotting all your I's, because it can get real murky real quick. But the positive news is that a lot of states have already been doing business this way for years and years and years. So that's why I say I'm kind of indifferent to the changes. Okay. You just want to be really well versed in it. But I know that it's possible. The sky's not falling. Real estate is still going to happen. You still need to buy and sell houses. And this is what I do. I don't work for free. And I know my value and I know how I guide clients. So it is what it is, and I know that it's possible to continue to have a thriving real estate market because many states have been doing this already. So they're kind of looking at us like, what are you guys freaking out about? Why is this new? So it's definitely possible.
Yeah. I mean, I know like in 2008, after the markets collapsed and everything, and they pulled out Dodd-Frank and they capped our commissions at 3%, which I honestly thought was kind of a good thing. Like I wasn't making more than that on my deals, and I thought people that were ripping people off. So I never cared. I was like, okay, cool.
Exactly. It's always a little weird at first. Yeah, it's always a little weird at first. There's always going to be growing pains, but I figure when we get into 2025, when we get past this first 6 months of growing pains, I think it's going to be business as usual. I don't think anyone's going to question anything after people kind of get over this hump and get over this, these scary headlines and everything. But people have been doing it, like I said, for years and years. This is nothing new to them. And I think silver lining, like you said, it's also setting a standard in the real estate industry. So to silver linings, I think it's going to weed out a lot of the, no offense, but hobbyist realtors who think that they can go open a door and make all kinds of money and, and brag about it online. But it really takes skill, and it's going to sharpen our negotiation skills. It's going to weed out agents from the business that don't live up to the professional standards that we need to have. And I think it's going to elevate the industry as a whole. So I'm okay with it.
I love the positive tone. I mean, this is our business, and there's going to be changes. There's going to be changes in the future. It's like, it's probably a good thing. I mean, they never had online real estate what, 20 years ago? I don't know, however long ago, maybe it was 30 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
realtors used to come with a booklet and
Right.
like, here's your listings, you know?
Right,
Like,
exactly.
so,
And I'm sure, you know, the advent of the whole like Purple Bricks company, if you remember that didn't work. And everyone was kind of freaking out like, oh no, iBuyers and iRealtors and, you know, all of this AI stuff. And it's like, sure, there's going to definitely be companies that try out that business model. There's going to be changes that come, but
they may work, they may not work, you know?
They may work, they may not.
Exactly.
So how are you going to adjust your business to these changes and follow the legal procedures and make sure your clients are still taken care of at the end of the day?
Yeah. I mean, in the future, I could see people wearing AR goggles and at the house,
virtually like showing a house through AI. I totally see that happening.
Yeah, so we'll see. It'll maybe one day happen, you know.
Maybe, and then by that point us three here will have diversified and we'll still be helping clients in some other way, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
We're not going anywhere, I don't think. We're here for the long haul, God willing.
This is, very cool. I mean, you kind of enlightened me on some things, and I love your positive spin. You know, and it's just changes happen, and we just go with the flow, and we gotta adapt. And there may be some things that are a little more inconvenient. Boo-hoo. As realtors, mortgage people, we get pretty big commissions for the most part, and you know, we do have to work for that, and we have to create value, and there's got to be a reason for us. If we're not of value, then they don't need us, and then guess what? We're not, you know, we have to find new careers. So
yeah, exactly. And I think it's going to be very important for, just as we were, you know, we've been trained in that we're used to going on interviews with the sellers, right? It's very common for a seller to interview multiple realtors to sell their home, right? And you go with the realtor who's offering you the greatest value, who makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside and that you know is going to close on your property. It's the same expectation for buyers now. You want to interview multiple buyers agents who, what do they do? What are they going to do for you to get your offers accepted? What is their process? I've been doing buyer consultations my whole career, so it's nothing new for me. Yes, now I've had to make some changes to it to further explain these legal changes. But other than that, it's something that I've always been prepared to do, is to have a buyer consultation with those buyers who are interviewing. So it's really just about knowing your profession, knowing your craft, and proving your value on both sides for sellers and buyers. And like I said, people are always going to need to buy and sell houses. And unless you're, you know, Chris, who doesn't need representation because you're a hotshot attorney and you know what's going on.
You know, from personal experience, I always like having someone on my corner.
Right. Who knows what they're doing, who talks about it every day, right? I mean, I could dream up in my head that, well, I can go argue that case in a courtroom. Here's what I would say, you know, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't want to represent myself in a courtroom because that's not what I do. I don't talk about it every single day, day in and day out. I don't know all the laws. So that's why you hire a professional. It's all right, sure, to go and represent yourself in court. Absolutely. You know, and you can have all the confidence in the world. But if it's not something that you know all the nuances to day in and day out, I would highly suggest that you seek a professional.
Good idea.
Yeah. Sorry, this light is so crazy in my office.
That's all good.
Kind of sunlight.
It happens. It's sunny. We're in California. What are you going to do?
I know, seriously. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you pretty much answered most of my questions, and I think everything's going to be fine. And we're just going to keep plugging away. Make sure as a buyer, you're, like Christie said, you know, you interview a buyer's agent, make sure you're choosing somebody that's going to bring the value, you know, and that's important. So it should have always been important. And, you know, exactly. So I just see like positive changes. It's going to make realtors probably be better realtors.
I think so too. I think it's definitely going to elevate the industry. I have a question for you, Brandon, because I know you are well versed in VA loans. What are you seeing, and what's been the pushback with these new changes? What kind of conversations are you having with veteran clients?
With veteran clients, I mean, I haven't really seen too much. It's not like this isn't really affecting me as a loan guy.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Good.
those if the seller's going to do the concessions or whatever you want to call it, I guess it is concessions. It doesn't affect. If I'm going to do a VA loan with 0 down, I can still get up to 4% and cover all your fees, and then you can still get seller concessions to cover that. So it doesn't change anything on my end.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then are people kind of calling you, freaking out about anything, buyers, sellers that aren't vets?
I mean, not yet.
Okay.
We're still kind of coming out, and we'll see kind of where it goes. And that's why I'm just educating myself as much as I can and being prepared. And, we'll just kind of see where it goes. But we'll go with the flow and make it smooth,
That's all we can do, I feel like.
For sure.
What else
Sounds to
can
me
we
like
do?
the one thing you need to be prepared for is adding it at 2.5% onto the loan.
Mm.
Well, no, I mean, we're not going to have to add that to the loan. I mean, I guess unless sellers aren't willing to give those concessions and stuff, you can't add that to the loan. It's going to have to come out of their pockets. So, if you're a VA, 0 down, you're getting seller concessions, and then the seller's not going to pay for it. Well, do you have enough money to cover it to pay your buyer's agent?
Or you go back to the seller and say, look, we'll add 2.5% to the sales price, but you're going to pay that in concessions because I need to finance it.
Yeah, that's a great point. But then one thing to keep in mind with that. So yes, in that way you can get around financing it, right? And the idea would be to add 2.5% to the offer price and get that back in credit. But what you don't want to run into is an appraisal issue. So that's why it's super important. That's why I gave the example of it, the perfect question and lead into it about the $900,000 home now maybe coming in at $850 because it was already accounting for those concessions. It built into the offer price. So if the buyer goes back and adds then 2.5% to their offer price, you just want to make sure that it doesn't knock off their numbers for their loan to their DTI ratios, their debt to income ratios within their loan. And Brandon can speak more to that, but also that you don't run into an appraisal value issue. So if the house is worth 900 and all the comparables show that it's 900 and that appraisal comes in at 900, there's not much that you can do because that part cannot be financed. The difference in the appraisal cannot be financed. So you want to still make sure that you're in line with the comparable properties if you try to finagle that.
And that's happened in the past as well with buyer concessions or not buyer concessions. Sometimes houses don't appraise, and then you have to go back to the negotiation table if it doesn't.
Exactly. So again, further negotiation. And then the only other thing that I'd say on that, as far as like the lender's involvement, is if the buyer is in a fortunate position to not be going FHA and they have, 20% down conventional, maybe Brandon could go back in and consider their options and their payment at maybe 15% down. And then, reallocate those funds that they were going to put towards their down payment towards paying their buyer's agent.
Yeah, and loans can totally be restructured like that.
Right.
But, the buyer's going to say, well, if I only put 15% down, I'm going to have PMI. But I've had this situation where we just did a lump sum upfront PMI, which was only a few grand. It wasn't that much money. And then we negotiated with the seller to help cover that. So it didn't cost, the buyer's payment was the same. They're putting the same amount down. We just, instead of doing a 20%, we did a 15%. So,
right. There's ways to restructure things. Again, it's going to take more communication, more transparency with the buyers and the sellers, and more conversation with the lenders and the team behind you. So now more than ever, it's so important that you have the right team to have these kinds of discussions with, know.
For sure. And that's the most important thing, is make sure you're dealing with people that are educating themselves, not just, like you said, those part-time agents that don't, let's just do the onesies and twosies once a year. That's
Yeah. And no offense,
No, yeah,
but if you're doing this as a hobby, it's probably not going to be for you anymore.
Yeah.
With these, it's not even going to be worth the headache, to be honest. Like,
know,
so
right?
if you're doing it as a hobby or on the side, I probably, if I found myself in that position, I probably wouldn't be doing it for much longer, because it got, it's increasingly more challenging. And you increasingly have to, like you said, continue to educate yourself and stay on top of all of these changes to be able to consider yourself a professional in the business.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I consider you a professional for sure.
Well, thank you. I consider you both fine gentlemen professionals as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you you taking your time out and giving us the education, and we'll do it again in the future.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. Anytime. I'd love to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks, you guys. Have a good rest of your day.